Hey y'all, it's Echo. So I just wanted to do a quick tutorial on how to make I guess like a cat box with like a bed in it. Or like, a box with a cat bed set up, basically. I thought it could be maybe, probably cute for builds and stuff. So here's the basic concept of what we're going to be working on today. And I'm going to switch to an empty plot real quick. So, okay, I think it's that one. Too many plots. Okay, so real quick, the basic items you are going to need basically, you are going to need a couple game passes for this. Actually, I should probably mention that before. It's Transform Plus, Advanced Placing, and I think that's the only two you're going to need to worry about for this one. Anyways, you're also going to need to you're going to be using the large cube, the small dirt pile. You can use any kind of pillow. I just chose the smaller one for the current one I'm going to be working on. And then if you want to put the cat in the box, you're going to need a transparent cube, and of course you're going to need the little kitty plushie, which I tend to use for my cats because, it looks pretty cute. I think it works. Anyways, let's hop into build mode. So, and I'm going to go into basement because I find it a little bit easier to work on building when you're like, if you're working on a ground floor, to use basement because then you can get like really close to what you're working on. Anyway, so you're gonna first need a cube, and you're first gonna want to add some color to it. Doesn't matter much once again on the color, just try to make sure it matches whatever you're gonna be putting it into. I think last time I was using like a color like I think one of these two in the actual build, but I think this one I'm gonna try to do something, more cutesy. So I'm gonna do, some more brighter colors, and then I like using the stain texture because it just adds a bit more, I guess, to the thing you're working on. And then you're going to want to scale it down. And it doesn't matter on sizing, once again, it can be any size. This is a pretty relaxed tutorial. And then you're gonna want one of these for the ceiling. And then you're gonna want to scale another set of these. So I'm just gonna scale that, and you're gonna want about like, about half the size of the actual bigger one. And I'm just gonna get a couple of those going, and I'm gonna put a third one there actually too for the sides that we're gonna need to rescale later. Next, you're gonna want to work on the walls, and you're just gonna take another one of the sections. I find it easier to just take the pre-existing thing you've already scaled, and then you're just gonna shrink it the side, and then you're gonna bring it up. We're gonna do about, about there-ish maybe this time. Once again, it doesn't have to be exact, you're just making a box. And then you are gonna need 3 of these, and I'm just gonna pop that one in there actually. That fits perfectly. And then I'm gonna take another one. And then you're gonna want to just rotate this one around, stick it in the back area. I'm just gonna shove it there, and I find it easier to just shove it in the general direction and use transform to just kinda, get it a little bit more closer. So, I'm gonna do that. That's good. I'm gonna try to get these pretty close in. So, about there. Same for that. We're just gonna guide that in just a touch. Like so. And now we're on to the fun part. So next you're gonna need your dirt pile, which is, it's gonna be kind of trust or process moment. You're gonna add one. You can add, depending on the size of your box, you can fit one, or you can maybe get like a second one. I'm gonna see if I can get that into the corner. It depends if you're worried about clipping or not. So I'm just gonna have a couple of them, but it depends. And then you're gonna want to color it. You can use, once again, any color or any pattern. This is basically gonna be a low blanket, so I'm gonna be using this pattern, and then I kind of want to use pink for this. So I'm gonna do a pretty pale pink color. And then you're gonna do the same color for the other dirt blocks you use. And then you're gonna take your pillow. And then, if you're gonna color it, just, oh, sorry. Pop on some colors of that. So I'm just gonna freeze that up a bit, and I'll get moved back into place in a moment. So I think I'm doing that, yeah. I tend to prefer doing a lot more muted colors, I guess, because in my opinion it looks a bit more realistic. Okay, and then you're gonna need to find it easier to just, you're gonna rotate it. And actually, if you want to, I find it easier to scale it into a bigger one actually and just do it like so. And then you're gonna use a smaller one for just, prettying it up a little bit more. And I kind of just place it pretty low into box and stuff, so we're just gonna put in there, and then we're just gonna shove it down a little bit. Kind of wait and like, okay, this is where you don't want it, you're just gonna pull it up a little bit where it fits a bit better. So poofda, and then I found out you can't take the cat and put it onto pillow, sadly, so this is where you're gonna have to take your transparent cube. And I'm just gonna copy that, and you're gonna want to scale it down as small as it'll go. Poofda, and then you're gonna want to shrink it a little bit. Fun fact, you can also use transparent cubes for putting decals on, like, other objects. Or, like, I guess making custom decals. So, for those who saw my last video, the devil traps I did up on the ceiling, you're pretty much going to use something like this. Put on your decal on one side and just rotate it using the transform thing. That might have been a little bit off topic, but these are, like, one of my favorite things to use. Anyways, and I tend to just color the transparent thing the same as one of the colors of the project you're making, just to try to get it blend in a little bit better. And you're gonna take your cat. I'm gonna rotate it a touch. Even though you can you can like free it up a little bit more with the transform thing you're gonna be using in a moment too. And then you can move the cat. So I'm just gonna move it onto the pillow now, and I'm gonna lift it up. Oh. Only issue is sometimes you misclick. Anyways, so you're just gonna grab the arrow, rotate it up a little bit so it's on the pillow. You're just gonna, you're gonna pretty it up. So, like so, and then I'm gonna try to rotate it so it's facing us a little bit more. So, I think that looks pretty good. Yeah. So poof that, and then you're gonna take, this is basically gonna be the inlet of your box. I'm just gonna put it right here, and you're gonna use the transform, and you're just gonna move it up, and you're gonna move it right over that section. And I'm just gonna pretty it up again, making sure it's nice and even. You got a pretty basic box and stuff, and then I like adding the flaps. So this one is just gonna camp out at the bottom. And I'm just gonna check and make sure it's even. I'm a little bit picky with that, trying to get it as even as possible on both sides. That's decent. Oh, and it's throwing a fit. Okay. There we go. Are you happy? Okay, nope, it's gonna scroll fit actually, so I think I got that as close to as possible. And then you're gonna take another flap, and that's gonna be the top. You're gonna take your transform, gonna lift it up, and you're just gonna, I'm gonna imagine that, you know, gravity's probably gonna pull the flap down a little bit. So you're just gonna rotate it just a touch down. And you're gonna want to pretty it up a little bit, then, you know, make sure it's actually attached to the box a bit better. And then you're checking, you know, I'm just checking both sides, making sure, you know, it looks good. And then this is just what I did with the build, is I just had an up and down flap. If you want to, you can also add a couple on the sides. So you're just gonna yeah, I think that's pretty close. So you're gonna rotate it. You may have to scale this depending on how big your box. Again, you're gonna have to readjust the sizing. Especially if you're worried about like the bottom clipping into anything. But I think that looks like it should be pretty even in our case. So I'm gonna rotate this out a little bit actually, you know, add just a little bit more, you know, shapes and stuff to the box. And I'm just checking, you know, making sure it's even. So yeah, I'm gonna fix that little section. There we go. Blend it in a little bit nice. And that's one side down. And I'm just gonna, sorry, I'm not used to computer action. I tend to do a lot of my builds on mobile, so if I'm a little bit slow, I apologize. Okay. And then you're pretty much gonna repeat the same thing. I'm just gonna do general estimate with that and rotate that on up. And we're gonna do that. You know, same thing as the other one, you're gonna rotate it to a position you want. And then you're gonna just adjust it. See, I think this is a pretty simple tutorial, but you know. Okay. And then, so you got, that's basically done. Another thing, if you want to add stuff to, you know, the outside of the box, add decorations and stuff, that's the wrong one. You can also add the, let's say you want to add some stickers. I don't want the two-sided. You're gonna get this thing, and you can just scale it down to the box. So. And if you want, you can look up stickers. I'm gonna try find some, I guess, real quick. So I don't have any pre-made, so I'm just gonna look it up on Roblox. Oh, I forgot stickers. And proof that you can add a little bit more detail to outside of your box that way too. So that is how you make your cat a little cat bed. I guess have a good day, y'all. I will probably try to get another video out at some point again.